The smoke found Eli long before he reached the cabin. It was the wrong kind of smoke, not the sweet, thin ribbon of hickory from his father's stove. This was the bitter, black smoke of burnt pine and scorched wool. It hung heavy in the frozen air of the valley. He spurred his pony faster, the animal's breath pluming in white clouds. The silence was wrong too. There was no sound of his father. Silas splitting wood, no sharp ring of the axe. There was only the wind moving through the skeletons of the aspen grove. He broke through the trees and pulled up sharp. The cabin was still standing, but the small barn beside it was a ruin of blackened timbers, hissing in the snow. The horse trough was overturned. The front door of the cabin was splintered, hanging open by one leather hinge. Eli slid from the pony, his rifle in his hand. He was 17, but he moved with the quiet caution of an old man. He stepped onto the porch. "Father," he called. His voice was swallowed by the sudden, heavy silence. He pushed the broken door aside. The small room was destroyed. Sacks of flour and beans were slashed open, their contents spilling onto the puncheon floor like a pale wound. The table was overturned. The stone fireplace was cold. And then he saw him. Silas was slumped against the woodpile near the hearth. He was alive. His eyes were open, staring at nothing. His face was bruised, a dark purple swelling one eye shut. His breath was shallow. Eli rushed to his side, dropping to his knees. "Father, who did this?" Silas tried to speak. His voice was a dry rattle. He raised a trembling hand, not to his own face, but toward the wall. Eli looked. The pegs were empty. His father's long rifle was gone. The powder horn was gone. But that was not what the old man was pointing at. He was pointing at the corner where the traps had been. For 2 generations, that corner had held the tools of their life, the heavy, oiled steel traps. Some were old, bearing the mark of Eli's grandfather. Others were new, bought with the last season's plues. There had been 40 of them. Now there were none. The pegs were empty. The floor was bare. They had taken the pelts from the barn. That was expected. They had taken the food. That was common. They had even taken the rifle, which was cruel. But taking the traps was something else. It was not theft. It was an execution. It was a message. You no longer belong here. You have no way to survive the winter. You are done. Eli helped his father to the bunk, covering him with the one remaining blanket. Silas's ribs were broken. Eli could feel the grate of bone. The old man gripped his son's arm. His good eye was clear and bright with a cold, terrible fire. "Harcourt," Silas whispered. The name was a curse. He came, with 20 men, said the valley was leased to the company. Eli's jaw tightened. Harcourt, a man who wore fine coats in the wilderness and believed a piece of paper from St. Louis gave him ownership of the mountains themselves. Eli stood. He walked back to the doorway, looking out at the ruined barn. He saw the tracks, not just horses, a heavy wagon. They had come prepared. They had come to erase his father from this valley. He looked at the snow falling, already beginning to soften the edges of the tracks. He looked at the high peaks to the west, the western slopes, the land of the Ute, the land of the old ones. His father had been a good man. He had trapped this valley for 30 years. He had honored the boundaries of the Ute. He had taken only what he needed. He had lived by the code, and Harcourt had broken him, not with a bullet, but with greed. Eli turned back. He picked up his father's broken axe handle. He felt the smooth, worn wood. He was just a boy. He had one horse, a single-shot rifle, and a half-dead father, but he also had his mother's blood. And he knew where to find the men who had signed their names in his father's ledger, not with ink, but with honor. He knew where the old debts were kept. He would not seek vengeance. He would seek justice. He would get the traps back. He looked at Silas, sleeping a pained, shallow sleep. The vow was made in silence. He would ride west. The fire crackles low. The first part of the tale is told. It's a cold night in the high country, and a story is good company. It warms the heart even when the wind blows hard. As this story finds you, I wonder where you are listening. What part of the world do you call home? Leave a word in the comments if you will. Let us know what fire you're sitting by as we see where this boy's oath will take him. The night is long and the journey has just begun. Before the smoke, before the broken door, there was the silence of a perfect winter morning. The valley known as Beaver's Rest was a white paradise. The creek was a dark, winding ribbon, breathing steam into the sub-zero air. Eli and Silas moved through the trees, their snowshoes making the only sound, a soft shush-shush on the new powder. Silas, tall and broad, moved with an easy grace. He stopped, holding up a hand. He pointed, a set of wolf tracks, fresh. "He's checking our lines too," Silas murmured, a small smile on his face. "Smart, but we're smarter." This was the life Eli had always known. It was a life of hard work and deep quiet. His father had taught him the language of the land, how to read the snow, how to smell a storm, how to know where the beaver would den, and, more importantly, how many to take. "You take the young ones," Silas always said, "and you leave the old ones. You take enough for the winter, and you leave enough for their winter. The Ute taught me that. This valley ain't ours, Eli. We're just guests here. You disrespect the host, you ain't invited back." Their world was bound by this code. Their cabin sat on the eastern edge of the valley, a place the Ute elders had granted Silas permission to build long ago. Silas had married a Ute woman, Eli's mother. She had passed when Eli was small, but her blood ran strong in him. He knew the Ute tongue. He knew their ways, and he knew the men who, like his father, had come to the mountains not to conquer them, but to live with them. The true mountain men. Men who had come west 20 years before, fleeing the very civilization that was now chasing them. The world at stake was this balance. It was the quiet respect between Silas, the Ute, and the land itself. That balance had been threatened 3 weeks prior. A man named Harcourt had ridden in, not with trappers, but with armed guards. He represented a fur company, one of the new, greedy ones that saw the mountains as a warehouse. Harcourt had unrolled a map on Silas's table. "This entire watershed, from the Divide down to the Green River, has been leased to the American Fur Company by the United States government," Harcourt had said. His voice was smooth, but his eyes were like chips of ice. Silas had looked at the map. He had looked at Harcourt. He had pushed the map back across the table. "That paper's wrong," Silas said, his voice calm. "This land belongs to the Ute. They give me leave to trap here because I respect their boundaries, because I am family." Harcourt had laughed, a short, ugly sound. "The Ute don't own this land, old man. A treaty says they do, but a newer treaty says they don't. Politics. What matters is, I have the paper. You're trespassing." "I've been here 30 years, Silas said, standing up. He was a head taller than Harcourt. "I've never trespassed a day in my life." "Then consider this an offer of employment," Harcourt said, his smile fading. "Work for us. All your plues go to the company. We give you traps. We give you wages." "I work for myself," Silas said, "and I don't need your traps. I have my grandfather's." "Then you're a fool," Harcourt had snapped, rolling up his map. "This valley will be trapped out by spring. We're bringing in 50 men. Either you're with us or you're in our way, and we remove what's in our way." Silas had simply pointed to the door. "Get out of my home." Harcourt's eyes had narrowed. "You'll regret this. Old man, this way of life, yours, the Utes, it's over. The future is coming, and it wants its beaver." He and his men had ridden off, their horses churning the snow. Now Eli understood. The attack hadn't been a random theft. It was a strategic move. It was the future Harcourt had promised. By taking the traps, Harcourt was not just stealing, he was ending Silas's way of life. He was making him a squatter on his own land. He was proving that his piece of paper was stronger than Silas's word. Eli finished packing. He had little: a small sack of dried jerky, his bedroll, his rifle, and 50 rounds. He tended to his father, making him drink water. Silas was weak, but the fire was back in his one good eye. Don't go after him, Eli," Silas whispered. "It's too many." "I'm not going after Harcourt," Eli said, strapping the bedroll to his pony. "I'm going to see Uncle Bear and Chief Black Hawk." Silas closed his eye. A faint smile touched his lips. "Jedediah Graves," he breathed. "He always did. Pay his debts." Eli nodded. He stepped out into the biting cold. He swung onto the pony. He did not look back at the ruined cabin. He looked west, toward the high, jagged peaks of the western slopes. It was a 3-day ride in good weather. In this snow, it could be 5, or it could be a lifetime. He pushed the pony forward. He had to cross the divide before the new storm hit. He was one boy, riding against a company, but he was not riding alone. He was riding with the memory of 30 years of honor. And he was going to call in a debt. The attack had been swift and brutal. Silas had been outside, splitting the last of the morning's kindling, when he heard the horses. It wasn't the slow, careful approach of a Ute hunting party or the plodding pace of a fellow trapper. It was the hard, fast rhythm of men who did not care about the noise they made. 20 riders, led by Harcourt, crested the small ridge by the creek. They fanned out, surrounding the cabin. Harcourt dismounted, his fine leather boots crunching in the snow. He smiled, that same cold, empty smile. "Last chance, Silas. Sign the contract. Work for the company." Silas stood tall, his axe held loosely in one hand. "I told you, this is Ute land. I'm a guest, and so are you, but you ain't welcome." "I am not a guest," Harcourt said, his voice dropping. "I am the owner, and I'm evicting you." He nodded to his men. "Take it all." Silas was not a young man, but he was powerful. When the first 2 men rushed him, he threw one into a snowdrift and met the other with the flat of his axe, sending him staggering. But he was 1 man against 20. Another guard, moving from behind, brought the stock of his rifle down hard across Silas's back. The old man roared a sound of pain and fury, and as he turned, another struck him in the face. He fell to his knees. They didn't stop. They kicked him. They beat him with their fists and their rifles. They did it with a cold, business-like efficiency. Harcourt watched, his face impassive. "That's enough," he said, bored. "He's just an old man. Get the traps." While 2 men dragged Silas to the woodpile, the others stormed the cabin. They were not thieves. They were vandals. They acted with a specific, pointed cruelty. They slashed the flour sacks, poured the salt into the snow, broke the few pieces of crockery Eli's mother had owned. They pulled the traps from the wall. They smashed Silas's long rifle, breaking the maple stock over the chimney hearth. They moved to the barn. They loaded every pelt, every cured hide onto their wagon. Then Harcourt took a torch from the fire. He looked at the meager barn, holding only a winter's supply of hay. He tossed the torch onto the hay. It ignited instantly. "Burn it," he said. Silas, conscious but unable to move, watched as the barn went up in flames. He watched his winter's work, his survival turn to ash. Harcourt mounted his horse. He looked down at Silas. "The world has changed, old man. You didn't change with it. This is what happens. Stay here and freeze, or walk east. But this valley is ours. If my men see you again, they will not be so gentle." They rode out, the heavy wagon wheels cutting deep ruts in the snow, carrying away 40 traps and a man's entire life. Hours later, Eli found him. After he had made his father comfortable, after the silent vow was made, Eli began his journey. The ride west was a frozen hell. The storm Harcourt had warned of was real, and it descended from the high peaks with a personal fury. The wind screamed. It drove the snow sideways, a blinding white wall that erased the sky and the earth. Eli's pony, a tough mountain-bred animal, struggled, plunging through drifts up to its chest. Eli wrapped his blanket tighter, bowing his head. He was not just fighting the cold. He was fighting the image of his father's face, the image of the empty pegs on the wall. He was a boy, sent to do a man's work. But the code his father had taught him was clear. You do not let a debt go unpaid. You do not let a wrong go unanswered. And you do not ever break your word. He rode for 2 days, sleeping only for short shivering hours in the lee of boulders, melting snow in his mouth for water. His hands were numb, his feet were stones. On the 3rd morning he crossed the high pass. The wind was a solid wall of ice, but as he descended the western slopes, the air calmed. The land changed. This was the land of the Ute, the high, protected valleys where the white men had not yet dared to build their forts. He found the winter camp in a canyon, blessed by hot springs, a thin layer of steam rising from the creek. The lodges of the Ute were quiet, their smoke rising straight into the cold air. He was stopped by sentries. He spoke to them in their tongue. He told them his mother's name. He told them he was Silas's son. He asked to see Chief Blackhawk, and he asked to see the man they called Kutachi, the bear. He was brought to a large lodge. Inside, the air was warm and thick with the smell of sweetgrass and roasting meat. Chief Blackhawk sat on thick buffalo robes. He was an older man, his face a map of wisdom and hard winters. Beside him sat a white man who looked as if he had been carved from the mountain itself. He was huge, wrapped in a buffalo robe, his hair and beard a wild, grizzled grey. His eyes, blue and sharp, missed nothing. This was Jedediah Bear Graves, a man who had been trapping these mountains since before Eli was born. A man who, 20 years ago, had been saved from the freezing Green River by a young Silas. Eli stood before them. He was covered in ice, shaking from the cold, but his voice was steady. He told them what had happened. He spoke of Harcourt. He spoke of the lease. He spoke of the beating. And finally, his voice thick, he spoke of the traps. When he finished, there was a long silence. Bear Graves looked at Chief Blackhawk. The chief looked at Eli. "This Harcourt," Blackhawk said, his voice deep, "he is the one who poisons the river. He builds his posts on our sacred land to the south. He does not honor the boundaries. He does not honor the land. He does not honor men." Bear Graves finally spoke. His voice was a low rumble like rocks moving. "Silas," he said, "he pulled me from the water. My life is his. My word is my bond." He looked at Eli. "You are your father's son, and your mother's son. You come here not for revenge. You come for justice. You come to restore what was stolen." Eli nodded. They took his tools. They took his honor. They left him to die. Bear Graves stood. He seemed to fill the entire lodge. "Chief," he said to Blackhawk, "my debt to Silas must be paid. This Harcourt has also insulted your people. The land he claims is yours." Blackhawk nodded slowly. "It is one fight. The man with the paper law has broken the law of the mountain, the law of respect." He turned to a young warrior. "Send the runners to every lodge. Tell the old trappers." He looked at Graves. "Tell your friends, the ones who remember what honor means." He looked back at Eli. "At dawn, the western slopes will ride. We will not bring war, boy. We will bring the weight." The journey back was nothing like the journey out. Eli was no longer a lone boy fighting the snow. He rode beside Bear Graves, wrapped in a warm buffalo robe given to him by Chief Blackhawk. Behind them, a silent army moved through the snow. It was not 500 mountain men. The title was a legend, born later. It was something stronger. It was the collected honor of the high country. There were 50 of the old trappers, men like Graves who had lived with the Ute for decades, who had married into the tribes, and who despised the greedy corporate fur companies that were destroying the beaver and the balance. These were men of iron, clad in buckskin and armed with heavy Hawkins rifles. And with them, riding in perfect, disciplined lines, were 450 Ute warriors. They were the braves of the western slopes, mounted on the best horses, carrying bows, lances, and rifles. They moved not as an army, but as a force of nature. They were, as Black Hawk had promised, the weight of the mountain itself. They made almost no sound. The snow-covered pines swallowed the tread of 500 horses. They crossed the divide at night, a river of dark shapes under 1 billion stars. When dawn broke, they were on the ridges above Beaver's Rest. Eli looked down. What he saw turned his stomach. Harcourt's men had already built a crude stockade around his father's cabin. A large canvas tent, the company's headquarters, was pitched nearby. The company flag, not the flag of the nation, but of commerce, snapped in the wind. He saw his father. Silas was sitting by the blackened ruins of the barn, a small, hunched figure. Harcourt himself stepped out of the tent, holding a cup of coffee. He was laughing with one of his guards. Bear Graves put a heavy hand on Eli's shoulder. "Wait, boy. Let him feel comfortable." They waited. The sun rose higher. The 500 men and warriors remained perfectly still, hidden in the trees and shadows of the ridgeline. They were ghosts. Finally, Eli could wait no longer. He nudged his pony. "I will face him," he said. Graves nodded. "Go. We are behind you." Eli rode down the slope alone. Harcourt saw him. His laughter stopped. He looked surprised, then angry. "The pup! He came back!" He shouted to his men. "Someone grab him!" 2 guards started forward, rifles ready. "I didn't come back for you, Harcourt," Eli called out, his voice clear and cold. "I came back for my father's traps." Harcourt sneered. "You came back to die. Boy, you and your half-dead father are finished." He raised his hand. "Take." "I think not," a new voice boomed, echoing across the valley. Bear Graves rode out of the trees. He sat on his huge horse, his rifle resting in the crook of his arm. He looked like a king of the wilderness. Harcourt's face paled. He knew of Jedediah Graves. Everyone did. "Graves, this is company business. It doesn't concern you." "Silas pulled me from the Green River," Graves said simply, as if that explained everything. "You beat a man who saved my life. You stole his tools. You dishonored him. That makes it my concern." "You and what army?" One of the guards mocked, though his voice trembled. Graves smiled. It was not a nice smile. He raised his hand, and then the ridges spoke. From every shadow, every tree line, every snowdrift, they rose. The Ute warriors, the mountain men. 450 arrows were nocked, the sound a soft shriek. 50 heavy rifles were cocked, the click-click echoing like ice cracking. They filled the entire rim of the valley, silent, still, and lethal. Harcourt's 20 men froze. They looked up, their faces white with terror. They were surrounded, outnumbered 25 to 1. Harcourt dropped his cup. "You have broken the law of this land, Harcourt," Graves boomed. "You brought the sickness of greed into this valley. Now you will make it right." He pointed to the wagon, where Eli's traps were piled. "You, personally, you will carry every trap. You will lay them at Silas's feet, and you will apologize." Harcourt was rigid with fury and fear. "Now," Graves commanded. The sound of 500 weapons being raised a fraction of an inch was the only answer. The reckoning had begun. It was not a battle. It was a judgment. The aftermath was silent. There was no gunfire, no blood. The 20 company men, seeing the impossible odds, seeing the grim faces of the Ute warriors and the cold eyes of the trappers, threw down their rifles without a word. Harcourt stood frozen, his face a mask of humiliation. "The traps, Mr. Harcourt," Bear Graves said, his voice a low growl. Harcourt looked at Graves. He looked at the hundreds of warriors watching him. He looked at Silas, who was now standing, leaning on Eli. Slowly, his shoulders slumped. He walked to the wagon. His hands, which had only ever held paper and money clips, trembled as he gripped the cold, oiled steel of the first trap. It was heavy. He stumbled as he carried it across the snow. He dropped it at Silas's feet. "And the others?" Graves commanded. For an hour Harcourt walked, back and forth, back and forth. He carried all 40 traps, one by one, from the wagon to Silas's feet. His fine coat was stained with rust and grease. He was breathing heavily, his face slick with sweat despite the cold. When the last trap was dropped, he stood before Silas, broken and humiliated. "My apologies," he choked out, the words tasting like acid. "Now the pelts," Graves ordered. Harcourt's men, disarmed and guarded, were forced to unload every pelt they had stolen and stack them by the cabin. When it was done, Bear Graves and Chief Blackhawk dismounted. They walked to Harcourt. "You are not a man of honor," Blackhawk said, his voice quiet, which made it all the more terrifying. "You are a thief. We will not kill you. That is not our way, but you will leave." They took the company's wagon. They took their rifles. They took their food. They left them with their horses and one blanket each. "It is a 2-day ride back to your fort," Graves said, "but it is a 4-day walk. I suggest you treat your horses well. You will walk out of this valley, and if you, or any man from your company, ever sets foot in Beaver's Rest again, we will not be here to talk. The mountains themselves will swallow you. Now go." Harcourt and his men, defeated, mounted their horses and rode east, a shamed and broken posse. The Ute and the trappers did not cheer. They watched in silence until the last man disappeared over the ridge. Then the valley came alive. The Ute warriors dismounted. Some began to tend to Silas. A medicine man brought herbs for his ribs and face. Others, with the trappers, began to repair the cabin door. They salvaged the wood from the burnt barn. In a single afternoon, the cabin was made whole. That evening, a great fire was built. Silas sat wrapped in warm robes, sharing tobacco with Chief Blackhawk. Eli sat beside Bear Graves. "You brought an army," Silas said quietly to Graves, his voice still hoarse, "for a few traps." Graves looked into the fire. "It wasn't for the traps, Silas. You know that. It wasn't even for the beating." He paused. "It was for the word. That man, Harcourt. His world is built on paper, on laws that change with the wind. He believes a signature on a lease gives him the right to break a man's life. He believes his gold is stronger than your honor." Graves picked up a stick and stirred the fire. "We had to show him, we had to show them, that in the high country paper burns. Gold is just soft metal, but a man's word, a debt owed, that is stone. That is the law that holds the mountains up. You pulled me from the river. The debt was paid. The world is back in balance." Eli listened. He watched his father nod, a look of profound peace on his face. He finally understood. The 500 men had not come to fight. They had come to bear witness, to prove that one man's honor, held true for 30 years, was heavier than all the gold in St. Louis. By morning, the sun broke over the peaks, clean and cold. The valley was reborn. The tracks of Harcourt's men were already filling with new snow. The Allies prepared to leave. Chief Blackhawk approached Eli. He placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "You are your mother's son," he said. "You have the blood of the Ute, but you also have your father's heart. You walk in two worlds. Do not let one side forget the other. The balance you keep is the balance of this land." He gave Eli a single eagle feather. "You are a boy no longer. You are a warrior of the valley." Bear Graves was the last to mount. He looked down at Eli, his weathered face softening. "You did good, Eli. You didn't ride for blood. You rode for honor. Never forget the difference." He looked at Silas. "My friend, the debt is clear, but my friendship is freely given." Silas nodded, his good eye bright. "Be safe, Jed." Graves turned his horse. "Keep your word, boy," he called back to Eli. "It's the only thing that weighs true." And then they were gone. The trappers melted into the trees, heading for their own lines. The Ute warriors rode west, vanishing back into the high country. Within an hour, the valley was silent again. It was as if they had never been there. Eli and Silas stood alone by their rebuilt cabin. Silas picked up the first trap. It was his grandfather's, the steel dark and smooth. He held it out to Eli. "The line needs setting," he said. Eli took the trap. Its weight was familiar, comforting. He walked toward the creek, his father, healing and whole, walking slowly beside him. The work continued. The land was quiet. The covenant had been kept. The world was changing. The company men, and the men with the paper laws, would come again. They would bring their railroads and their cities, and they would try to own the sky. But for this day, on the western slopes, the old code had held. It was never about the strength of 500 men. It was about the strength of one promise. Harcourt had 20 men bound by gold. Eli had 500 bound by an old debt and a shared respect. One force is brittle. It breaks under pressure. The other is stone. It is the mountain itself. Courage is not always about the fight. Sometimes it is about the journey. It is about knowing who to trust and being the kind of man who can be trusted in return. If you enjoyed this story, stay a while longer by the fire. There are more tales from the high country, where honor rides the wind.